This entitled HOA Karen spray chemicals directly into a service dog's face. Then watch her entire world unravel when she realizes she just committed a federal crime on camera. Security footage captures a middle-aged woman in designer yoga pants aggressively spraying a substance at a German Shepherd wearing a service vest. Within seconds, the dog lets out a painful yelp, pawing frantically at his burning eyes while bystanders rush to help. What this woman thought would be a quick act of cruelty instantly turned into the evidence that destroyed her life. That's the sound of a war hero's best friend being hurt by a woman who thinks neighborhood rules are more important than federal law. Karen Whitmore had no idea that what she just did has the same serious consequences as attacking a federal officer: a $50,000 fine, 6 months in prison, and a felony record that would ruin her successful career in real estate. But here's what really gets me fired up. This veteran, who has a Purple Heart, had been trying to solve this issue peacefully for months. Karen should have backed off. Instead, she gave him the perfect way to take her down. What would you have done the second she pulled out that spray bottle? Leave your honest thoughts below. I read every single comment, and a quick question before we get into the story. Where in the world are you watching from? It seems like these stories about justice hit a little differently depending on where you live. Meet Jake Thornfield, 34 years old, a former Army medic and a Purple Heart recipient. He's the kind of person who would give you anything you needed. 3 years ago, Jake was in Afghanistan, removing shrapnel from other soldiers, when an IED explosion changed everything. He lost some of the hearing in his left ear, developed PTSD that hit him like a freight train, and came home to a marriage that couldn't handle what the war had done to him. After his divorce, Jake moved to Pinewood Heights, a peaceful middle-class community in suburban Colorado. The biggest problem there used to be someone leaving their trash cans out for an extra day. With 200 homes and $45 monthly HOA fees, it was a mix of young families and older people. It was the kind of neighborhood where people actually say hi to each other. A perfect place for a guy trying to get his life back in order. And Jake wasn't alone. Meet Rex, 4 years old, an 85-pound German Shepherd full of intelligence and loyalty. He was specially trained for PTSD episodes and to alert Jake to sounds. When Jake's anxiety gets bad, Rex provides deep pressure therapy. When someone comes up on Jake's blind side, Rex positions himself to block them. The light clinking sound of Rex's tags on the sidewalk became a comforting sound in Jake's recovery. Everything was calm until the HOA board elections 6 months ago. That's when Karen Whitmore decided that Pinewood Heights needed her special way of enforcing community rules. Karen is 52 and has been a real estate agent for 15 years. She drives a white Mercedes SUV with a license plate that says PRT Val, and yes, she thinks it's clever. She was elected as HOA vice president because she promised to protect property values by keeping things in proper order. What that really meant was she wanted the power to make everyone else's lives difficult. Karen had been watching too many online videos about people faking service animals and decided she was some kind of detective for disabilities. She would drive through the neighborhood in her SUV, using a stopwatch to time people's sprinklers and an actual ruler to measure the height of their grass. The sun's glare off her windshield became a sign for everyone that the neighborhood patrol was on its way. Then came Jake's first official notice. It was delivered by certified mail on official HOA letterhead. It was a notice of violation for an unauthorized pet. It claimed Rex was breaking the community's rule about having only one small pet under 25 pounds. The fine was $500, plus an additional $50 every day until the pet was gone. Jake's response was exactly what you'd expect from a good person. He sent in all his ADA paperwork, veterinary documents, and Rex's full training records. Everything. Any reasonable person would need to understand the situation. The smell of freshly cut grass and the mist from sprinklers should have been the only things people worried about on their morning walks. Karen's reply was, "Documentation can be faked. I know a fake service animal when I see one, and that's just an expensive pet." That's when Jake understood he wasn't dealing with someone who was just uninformed. He was dealing with someone who was purposefully discriminating and using her HOA position to do it. Karen started taking pictures of Jake and Rex on their walks and spreading gossip around the neighborhood about how Jake was trying to get special treatment. She even posted in the community Facebook group about a supposed service animal fraud epidemic sweeping the country. Jake tried to be reasonable one more time. He asked Karen to meet for coffee and calmly explained his needs and showed her how Rex was trained to respond. The rough feel of Rex's fur under his fingers during moments of anxiety should have been proof enough that this was a real working relationship, not a pet. Karen's response was, "I don't believe in invisible disabilities. If you're really disabled, it should be obvious to everyone." That's when Jake knew things were about to get ugly. Karen wasn't finished playing her HOA detective games. 2 weeks after the coffee meeting, Jake got another certified letter. This time, it demanded he show up at an emergency HOA board meeting to talk about his ongoing violation of the community's pet rules. Karen had done her research, and by that I mean she printed out 17 pages of articles from the internet about the penalties for fake service animals. She walked into the community center like she was about to present evidence at the Supreme Court. She had manila folders with color-coded tabs and reading glasses perched dramatically on her nose. The smell of old coffee mixed with Karen's vanilla perfume made the whole room feel uncomfortable. "If you're really disabled," Karen announced to the 5-person board, "then prove it publicly. We need your complete military medical records, psychiatric evaluations, and doctor's notes. The community has a right to verify these claims." This is where Karen made her first big mistake. Jake had spent months after his injury reading up on all the laws about disability rights, partly to protect himself. A social worker from the VA had even warned him that this exact situation might happen. Most people don't know that demanding medical records from disabled people is a lot like asking to see someone's bank account before they can buy groceries. It's not just rude, it's against federal law. Jake showed up with his own manila folder, looking like he was ready to cooperate. But instead of medical records, he brought something Karen wasn't expecting: the actual law. "Actually, Karen," Jake said, his voice as solid as rock, "what you just demanded violates federal housing law. According to the Americans with Disabilities Act, you can't ask for medical records, require special ID cards for service animals, or demand proof of disability. The only legal questions you can ask are, is this a service animal required because of a disability? And what work has the dog been trained to perform?" The sound of Karen's long acrylic nails frantically tapping her clipboard filled the sudden silence. You could almost hear her brain working hard to figure out why her online research hadn't covered this legal trap. But here's the thing about people who think they are always right. When faced with facts, they don't give up. They get even more stubborn. "You're just hiding behind legal technicalities," Karen snapped. "I suggest we create a new HOA rule that requires all service animals to pass a community-run test. Let the neighbors vote on whether your dog seems real." Board member Gladys Rivera, a retired elementary school teacher, shifted in her seat. "Karen, I don't think we can legally. Real service dogs wouldn't need special protection from reasonable community standards," Karen interrupted, her voice getting so high it made dogs nervous and children want to cry. A young mum named Ashley Cameron spoke up from the back, saying her son, who has autism, loved seeing Rex on their walks, and that the dog's calm presence helped during her son's difficult times. But Karen had her supporters. Bob Harris, a retired cop, Martha Stevens, the PTA president, and Dale Morrison, a small business owner worried about property values, were all on her side. Jake's hands were sweaty on the metal folding chair, not from anxiety, but from a controlled anger. He asked for a 30-day delay to get more documentation, even though he knew he didn't have to prove anything. He just wanted to see how far Karen's discrimination would go. During those 30 days, Jake learned all about Karen's history. She had previously targeted an elderly resident with an oxygen tank, claiming her medical equipment was unattractive. She had also harassed a family with a mobility scooter, demanding that their ramp get board approval. Jake was just the latest person in Karen's planned effort to get rid of anyone she thought was bad for her precious property values. She was basically running a one-person plan to make the neighborhood more exclusive, and her HOA authority was her weapon. What Karen didn't know was that she had just given a Purple Heart veteran all the tools he needed to destroy her little kingdom. Karen's 30-day deadline arrived like Christmas morning for someone who loves to cause problems. She had spent those weeks creating what she called her community awareness campaign, which was just a fancy way of saying she was about to make Jake's life a living hell. First came the anonymous letters. Professional-looking flyers appeared in mailboxes all over Pinewood Heights with headlines like "Service Dog Fraud," "What Every Homeowner Needs to Know," and "Is Your Neighbor Scamming the System?" Karen had clearly spent hours at Kinko's printing these on official-looking paper, complete with stock photos of aggressive dogs and made-up statistics about emotional support animal abuse. Then she started her petition. Karen would stand at the community mailboxes every evening around 5:30, clipboard in hand, stopping neighbors as they got their mail. "We need to make our pet policies clearer," she would say in her fake, caring neighbor voice, "for everyone's safety and property values." But Karen's real masterpiece was her surveillance. She started following Jake and Rex with her phone camera on their walks, narrating as if she were hosting some strange nature show. Day 12 of monitoring the supposed service animal, she would mutter into her phone, loud enough for Jake to hear. "The subject seems to be acting like a normal pet, sniffing, marking territory. No obvious disability assistance observed." The crunching of gravel under Karen's expensive sneakers as she stalked them became the theme song of their nightly walks. Jake could feel his jaw tighten every time he heard that sound behind them. This is where Jake's military training kicked in, the part Karen had completely underestimated. In the army, when someone is trying to mess with you, you don't react with emotions. You record everything, you get ready to defend yourself, and you wait for them to make a big enough mistake to justify your counterattack. Jake started his own project to document everything. Every email Karen sent was screenshotted and saved. Every social media post was archived. Every time she confronted him was recorded on his phone. He installed security cameras on his property, not just to protect himself, but because he had a feeling Karen's behavior was about to get worse than simple harassment. Then Jake reached out to Maria Santos, a paralegal who lived 3 streets away. Maria had been hearing all the neighborhood gossip and knew discrimination when she saw it. Over coffee at Jake's kitchen table, she explained something that made his blood run cold. "Jake, you're not Karen's first target," Maria said, spreading out a manila folder of her own. "I've been quietly keeping track of her pattern for months. She targeted a Mrs. Patterson with an oxygen concentrator, claiming it was a fire hazard. She went after the Cameron family when their autistic son had meltdowns in the backyard, saying it was disturbing the peace. 3 families have sold their homes for less than they were worth just to get away from her harassment." That's when Jake realized he wasn't dealing with a small-time HOA dictator. Karen was running a systematic plan to force out anyone she considered undesirable: disabled residents, families with special needs children, and elderly people with medical equipment. She was essentially doing a type of ethnic cleansing, but instead of race or religion, she was targeting disability and vulnerability. Meanwhile, Karen convinced the HOA to hire a property management consultant, who happened to be her brother-in-law, Rick. He had no real qualifications but was good at being intimidating. Rick started showing up at Jake's house every day, measuring the grass to the 1/4 inch, timing the sprinklers with a stopwatch, and taking pictures of Rex's bathroom habits like he was doing a serious investigation. The sound of Rick's work, boots on Jake's gravel driveway at 7 a.m. every morning, became a form of psychological warfare. Jake would watch from his kitchen window as Rick measured the same rosebush 3 times, checking his clipboard as if he were calculating something very important. But here's what Karen didn't know. Every single one of Rick's so-called violations was being documented by Jake's security cameras. Every measurement, every picture, every attempt at intimidation. Jake was building a federal case, one ridiculous HOA violation at a time. The pressure from the community was also growing. Karen's supporters started avoiding Jake at the mailboxes. Someone left an anonymous note on his car windshield that just said, "Faker" in big letters. Rex was getting anxious from the constant watching, showing signs of stress like panting when it was cool out and not wanting to go on their usual walking routes. Jake's PTSD symptoms were also getting worse from the constant harassment. But he put that energy into research. He found out that Karen's real estate license had 2 formal complaints against it, both for discrimination against disabled people in housing deals. One of those clients had been a veteran with a service dog. Karen was about to learn that targeting disabled veterans isn't just morally wrong. It's a federal crime with consequences that could destroy everything she had built. 3 months into Karen's campaign of harassment, she made the one mistake that would ruin her life. It happened on a Tuesday evening during Jake and Rex's regular walk around the neighborhood. The sun was setting behind the identical houses, casting long shadows across the sidewalk where Rex's service vest shone under the streetlights. Karen came out from behind her perfectly trimmed hedge like a suburban predator, holding a spray bottle filled with what looked like a watered-down cleaning solution. The sharp smell hit Jake's nose right away. Ammonia mixed with white vinegar, the kind of harsh mix that burns your nose and makes your eyes water. "Your dog attacked my prize roses," she announced, even though Jake and Rex had been walking on the public sidewalk, nowhere near her property. This natural pet repellent will teach him to respect private property. This was the moment that changed everything. Karen raised that spray bottle and aimed it directly at Rex's face, not at the ground as a warning, not in the air to intimidate, but straight at a federal service animal's eyes and nose. Jake's PTSD kicked in hard. The sudden aggressive movement, the chemical smell, and Rex's immediate distress all triggered every combat instinct Jake had learned in Afghanistan. But instead of reacting with violence, his military training took over. Record everything. Stay calm. Let the enemy destroy themselves. "Karen," Jake said, his voice dangerously quiet as he pulled out his phone and hit record. "You just committed a federal crime on camera." Rex immediately started showing signs of chemical exposure, drooling a lot and frantically pawing at his eyes. It was the kind of panicked behavior that meant those chemicals were burning his sensitive nose and mouth. Jake's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a controlled fury as he watched someone hurt his best friend. Karen's reaction was exactly what you would expect from someone who has never faced real consequences. She completely denied it and then got even more defensive. "It's just natural ingredients," she insisted, trying to hide the spray bottle behind her back like a guilty child. "Ammonia and vinegar are completely harmless." That's when Jake made his first smart move. He had Maria Santos on speed dial and put her on speakerphone right there on the sidewalk. "Maria, I need you to hear this. Karen just sprayed chemicals directly in Rex's face and claimed it was harmless." Maria's voice came through loud and clear. "Karen, ammonia and vinegar create chloramine gas when mixed. You just chemically burned a federal service animal. That's a felony under the Americans with Disabilities Act." You could see the color drain from Karen's face as the words federal and felony sank in. She tried to claim that Jake had somehow provoked the incident, but Jake's security cameras had captured everything. Rex walking calmly on his leash, staying on the public sidewalk, and showing zero aggressive behavior. Jake immediately called 911, asking for both police and animal control. When Officer Martinez arrived 20 minutes later, Rex was still showing signs of distress, and the chemical smell was still hanging in the evening air. The officer took one look at the situation and shook his head. "Ma'am, interfering with a service animal is a federal offense," Officer Martinez explained to Karen, who had somehow convinced herself she was the victim. "We're talking about a potential $50,000 fine and 6 months in jail." Karen's reaction was a textbook tantrum from someone who feels entitled. She demanded to speak to Officer Martinez's supervisor. She claimed Jake had set her up. She tried to get her friend Bob Harris, the retired cop, to help. But Bob took one look at the situation and went back into his house without saying a word. By then, neighbors were coming out of their homes to see what all the noise was about. Ashley Cameron had seen the whole thing from her kitchen window and was recording on her phone. 3 other neighbors confirmed that Jake and Rex had been on the public sidewalk the entire time. The veterinarian's examination 2 hours later showed chemical burns on Rex's nose and around his eyes. They were minor injuries that would heal, but it was clear proof that Karen's harmless spray had caused real harm to a working service animal. This is where Jake showed the kind of strategic thinking that wins wars. He refused Officer Martinez's suggestion to press charges right away. "I want to see how far this goes," he told the officer. "Give me the full 30-day window to decide." Karen thought she had gotten away with it. She had no idea that Jake was about to use those 30 days to build a federal case that would destroy everything she had worked for. The chemical attack wasn't the end of her harassment. It was the exact piece of evidence Jake needed to end her entire world. Maria Santos had been looking through public records for 3 weeks when she called Jake with the kind of discovery that changes everything. Her voice was full of barely controlled excitement and righteous anger. "Jake, you need to sit down for this," she said over the phone. "Karen isn't just some small-time HOA tyrant. She's been running a full-scale gentrification scam, and your HOA has been paying for it." Within an hour, Maria was at Jake's kitchen table with 3 banker's boxes of documents spread out everywhere. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the musty scent of old paper as she walked Jake through 18 months of financial fraud that made his head spin. "Remember Karen's brother-in-law, Rick, the fake property management consultant?" Maria asked, pointing to a stack of invoices. "The HOA has paid him $15,000 for professional inspections over the past year and a half. Rick doesn't have any licenses, certifications, or a real business registration. It's all fake." But the financial fraud was just the beginning. Maria had found something much more disturbing. Karen's planned campaign to force out unwanted residents wasn't just random harassment, it was a carefully planned real estate scheme. "Look at this pattern," Maria said, spreading out a neighborhood map with colored pins on it. Every family Karen had targeted lived in homes worth $20,000 to $30,000 more than the neighborhood average. She harasses them until they sell their homes for cheap to escape the stress. Then she comes in with cash offers below market value through fake companies. Jake stared at the map, feeling that familiar surge of battle adrenaline. Red pins marked the families who had been forced out. Mrs. Patterson with her oxygen concentrator, the Martinez family whose son had cerebral palsy, the elderly couple whose granddaughter visited with her seizure-alert dog. Blue pins showed the properties Karen had bought for cheap through various companies. "She's been using her power in the HOA as a weapon to target protected groups," Maria continued. "Disabled residents, families with special needs, elderly people with medical equipment. Once they're gone, she sells the properties for a huge profit." The scale of Karen's operation was unbelievable. She had used HOA money to pay her brother-in-law for fake inspections that gave her a reason to harass people. She had twisted HOA rules to target certain residents while letting her allies get away with the same violations. She had even used community meetings to gather information about which families might be easy to pressure. Jake's chemical attack wasn't a single event where Karen was just trying to show her power. It was Karen's desperate move when her usual harassment tactics didn't work on him. She had moved from psychological games to actual assault because Jake had refused to play along. "There's more," Maria said, pulling out bank records that made Jake's blood run cold. "Karen has been stealing HOA funds beyond just the fake consulting fees. There's $23,000 in unauthorized spending over the past 2 years. Community improvement funds that were supposed to go toward playground equipment, and street repairs went straight into Karen's personal bank accounts." The evidence was undeniable. Karen had approved payments to herself for emergency tree trimming that never happened. She had paid her real estate office for community newsletters that cost 3 times the normal price. She had even charged the HOA for the installation of her own home security system, claiming it was a safety requirement for board members. But here's what really made Jake's hands shake with anger. Karen had been specifically targeting disabled veterans because she knew they often didn't have the money to fight back legally. She had researched Jake's financial situation, his divorce, settlement, and his VA disability payments. She had figured that a single dad on a fixed income wouldn't have the money for a long legal battle. What Karen hadn't figured was that Jake had something more valuable than money. He had Maria Santos, a paralegal who specialized in disability discrimination cases, and a growing group of neighbors who were finally ready to fight back. The legal consequences were huge. Federal housing discrimination came with fines up to $100,000 per violation. Stealing from the HOA was a felony with a 5-year prison sentence. Violations of her real estate license could end Karen's career forever. And now that they had evidence of a planned effort to target specific groups, conspiracy charges were possible. Jake looked at the evidence spread across his kitchen table and realized he was no longer the victim. He was the prosecutor in a federal case that could set a new legal standard for how HOAs are held accountable nationwide. Karen had given him the perfect weapon to use against her, and she had no idea what was coming. "Maria," Jake said quietly, "how do we make sure she never does this to anyone else again?" Maria's smile was as sharp as steel. "We completely, legally, and ethically destroy her, and we make sure every HOA in America learns from her example." Jake's living room looked like a war room by Thursday evening. Maria Santos had taken over the coffee table with her legal documents. Ashley Cameron was in charge of community outreach from the couch. And Gladys Rivera, the retired teacher who had finally had enough of Karen's nonsense, was explaining HOA procedural rules from her spot by the fireplace. Rex had settled himself in the middle of it all, his calm presence keeping everyone grounded. The smell of Maria's strong Cuban coffee mixed with the sound of shuffling papers and clicking laptop keys. This wasn't just about getting justice for a single chemical attack anymore. This was about taking down an entire system of discrimination that had been hiding behind a respectable suburban image. "We're going to hit her with everything at once," Maria announced, spreading a timeline on the wall like a military campaign map. 3 coordinated attacks that she can't defend against at the same time. The first was a case about federal civil rights violations. Maria had been researching similar cases all over the country, and Jake's situation was a perfect example of discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Housing providers, including HOAs, cannot harass residents based on their disability, cannot demand medical documents for service animals, and can absolutely not physically attack a working animal. The federal penalties alone could reach $150,000. Maria explained, using her paralegal training to make complex law sound simple. But here's what most people don't know. HOA board members are personally responsible for discrimination violations. Karen's personal savings are on the line, not just community funds. Ashley had been working with her neighborhood network, and her findings were shocking. 12 families had stories about Karen's harassment. The elderly man with the hearing aids was told his medical equipment was disturbing during board meetings. The woman whose husband used a wheelchair faced constant complaints about their ramp. The family whose daughter with diabetes needed medical alert monitoring was told that service dogs for invisible disabilities weren't legitimate. "She's been running the scam for 3 years, Ashley reported, looking at her notebook. Every family she targeted sold their home for less than market value. Karen has made over $200,000 in profit from properties she forced people to abandon." The second part was the financial fraud investigation. Gladys had provided HOA meeting minutes that showed how Karen manipulated votes. Every time someone questioned an expense, Karen would create a diversion by talking about community standards violations. Her voting bloc, Bob, Martha, and Dale, approved every fraudulent payment without asking questions. HOA embezzlement is a felony in Colorado, Maria pointed out, highlighting the relevant laws. But the conspiracy part makes this federal. She used banks across state lines to move stolen funds, which triggers federal anti-racketeering laws. Here's something most people don't realize about HOA fraud. Board members can't hide behind corporate protection when they are stealing community money. Karen's personal house, her Mercedes, her real estate business assets, everything was now at risk of being seized. The third part was community organizing. Gladys knew the HOA bylaws better than Karen did, and she had found the recall procedures that Karen had hoped no one would discover. With the right evidence of financial wrongdoing and discrimination, they could remove Karen's entire group of supporters and install new leadership within 60 days. The annual HOA meeting is in 4 weeks, Gladys announced. Perfect timing for our maximum public embarrassment. We'll have federal investigators, local news, and every neighbor who's been afraid to speak up will finally get their chance. Jake's role was very important, but also dangerous. He had to keep acting vulnerable while secretly building a completely solid case. Every time he interacted with Karen was now being recorded. Every harassment incident was documented with the exact time. Rex had to handle the ongoing stress, but Jake knew this was the only way to protect future families from Karen's targeting. Maria had contacted the local FBI office about the civil rights violations, and Agent Sarah Martinez was very interested in making an example out of this case. Systematic discrimination against disabled veterans was the kind of federal crime that gets news headlines and sets legal standards. The timeline was tough, but possible. 30 days to gather the final evidence, work with federal authorities, and prepare the community for Karen's public downfall. By the time the annual meeting arrived, Karen would be facing federal charges, felony, fraud accusations, and complete social ruin, all caught on camera for the biggest possible impact. Remember, Maria warned as they finished for the evening, Karen is going to get desperate when she realizes what's happening. Desperate people make stupid mistakes, but they can also be dangerous. Document everything. Don't trust anyone in her circle, and never be alone with her. Jake looked around his living room at this unlikely group of suburban justice fighters and felt something he hadn't experienced since Afghanistan. The calm certainty that comes from having better intelligence. A better plan, and knowing you are in the right. Karen had picked the wrong veteran to mess with. Karen's desperation started to show 3 weeks into Jake's investigation, and desperate people make stupid decisions you can predict. It began when Ashley Cameron mentioned to her friend Sarah at the grocery store that the whole neighborhood was getting together to support Jake. Sarah happened to be Karen's hairdresser, and by Tuesday morning, Karen knew something was going on. Her first move was a classic Karen move, trying to destroy evidence. She claimed the HOA's computer system had a major failure and that all financial records from the past 2 years were completely gone. She even brought in her teenage nephew to confirm the technical diagnosis, as if a 16-year-old's word would fool federal investigators. What Karen didn't realize was that Maria had already gotten a court order for the bank records directly from the financial institution. You can delete files from your laptop, but you can't hack into Chase Bank and erase transaction histories. Every fraudulent payment to Rick, every stolen community fund, every suspicious transfer was saved in digital form. While Karen was playing IT support, she launched a social media smear campaign. She created 3 fake Facebook accounts with generic names like Concerned Pinewood Resident and Property Values Matter, posting doctored photos that supposedly showed Rex attacking neighborhood children. The images were so badly photoshopped they were laughable. You could literally see the pixel lines where she had pasted Rex's head onto random aggressive dogs. Jake's response was beautifully simple. He let Karen's lies speak for themselves. Every fake post was screenshotted and sent to Maria's evidence file. Every made-up story was checked by neighbors who had actually witnessed Jake and Rex's interactions. Karen was basically building Jake's defamation case for him, one crazy post at a time. Then came Karen's attempt to bribe him. She approached Jake at the community mailboxes on a Thursday evening, smelling of desperation and that vanilla perfume that had become her signature scent of harassment. The setting sun cast long shadows as she made her offer with the smooth confidence of someone who had clearly done this before. "Jake, I think we can solve this situation without a fight," she said, pulling out an envelope stuffed with cash. $10,000 in cash if you voluntarily move out. Think of it as a fund for a new beginning. The community would be better off, and you could find somewhere that works better for your needs. Jake's phone was already recording in his pocket, a habit he had developed during Karen's harassment. Her offer wasn't just a bribe. It was an admission of systematic discrimination against disabled residents. She was literally paying him to leave because of his disability, which violated about 17 federal laws at once. "Karen," Jake said calmly, "are you offering me money to move because I have PTSD and a service dog?" "Well, when you put it like that," Karen started, then stopped herself. But the damage was already done. She had just confessed to federal housing discrimination on an audio recording that would sound perfect in court. The community pressure was growing in ways Karen hadn't expected. Her former supporters were quietly distancing themselves as word spread about the financial investigation. Bob Harris returned the security system Karen had installed at the HOA's expense, saying he didn't want any conflicts of interest. Martha Stevens found out that Karen had been talking bad about her parenting skills to other board members, using their alliance to cover up personal attacks. Even Dale Morrison, Karen's most reliable vote, started asking uncomfortable questions when he learned that Karen had sent potential customers away from his landscaping business while giving HOA work to her brother-in-law, Rick. Karen's family life was also falling apart. Her husband, Dave, had discovered the legal fees on their credit card statements and was threatening to get a divorce over what he called her HOA obsession. Rick was thinking about cooperating with the investigators after learning about potential federal charges. Their teenage daughter was embarrassed by her mother's increasingly erratic social media behavior and had blocked Karen on all platforms. The harassment was getting more frequent and desperate. Karen started parking outside Jake's house at random times, taking photos through his fence like some kind of suburban private investigator. She called animal control every day with fake reports until the officers started threatening to charge her with harassment for misusing emergency services. But here's where Karen's desperation led to her biggest strategic error. She started looking into Jake's military service, trying to find information to attack his character. She contacted his ex-wife, looking for damaging information, hired a shady private investigator to dig through his medical records, and even posted flyers around the neighborhood questioning whether Jake was really disabled enough to deserve special treatment. Every single one of these actions was another federal crime: harassment of a disabled veteran, a violation of medical privacy, and systematic discrimination based on disability. Karen was essentially gift-wrapping additional felony charges and delivering them to Jake's legal team. Jake remained completely calm throughout Karen's meltdown, documenting each incident with the careful patience of someone who had learned to wait for the perfect moment. Rex was showing stress from the constant surveillance, but Jake knew they just had to last a few more weeks before Karen's world completely collapsed. The final part of Karen's desperate campaign was her attempt to get community support by scaring people about dangerous veterans with PTSD. She had no idea that Pinewood Heights was home to 12 other veterans, including 2 Purple Heart recipients, who were getting very tired of Karen's suggestions about their mental health. Karen was about to learn that attacking one veteran meant attacking them all. Karen's ultimate weapon came 2 weeks before the annual HOA meeting, when she realized her usual tactics weren't just failing, they were actively ruining her life. That's when she decided to go completely all out, starting by hiring a private investigator who specialized in what he called veteran disability verification. The PI, a slimy former security guard named Danny Krause, started digging into Jake's military records like he was investigating war crimes. Karen paid him $3,000 to prove that Jake was faking his PTSD for government benefits. Danny's investigation included contacting Jake's former army unit, his ex-wife Jennifer, and even trying to get into his VA medical files. This is where Karen's desperation turned into pure comedy. Danny's investigation showed that Jake had been awarded the Purple Heart for saving 3 soldiers during an IED attack, had been praised for his bravery under fire, and had glowing reviews from everyone he had served with. Jennifer, despite their divorce, gave a detailed statement about Jake's honesty and the real nature of his service-related disabilities. But Karen wasn't done making a fool of herself. She took Danny's findings and created flyers that she posted around the neighborhood with headlines like, "Is this man really disabled?" and "PTSD or fraud? You decide." The flyers included Jake's military photo, details about his service record, and Karen's own commentary about veterans who milk the system. The community's response was fast and powerful. Pinewood Heights was home to 12 veterans from various conflicts, and Karen had just insulted every single one of them. Retired Marine Sergeant Tom Rodriguez, who had been staying out of the HOA drama, organized a veteran support rally in Jake's front yard that attracted 30 people and was covered by the local news. Jake's response was a masterful piece of strategy. He invited Channel 7 News to film Rex's actual service work. The news segment showed Rex responding to Jake's hearing loss by alerting him to people approaching, demonstrated the deep pressure therapy Rex provided during anxiety episodes, and featured their veterinarian explaining the extensive training required for PTSD service dogs. Karen's story about a fake service dog looked completely ridiculous next to professional proof of Rex's real work. The news story went viral locally, with thousands of shares and comments supporting Jake and criticizing Karen's conspiracy theories about veteran fraud. That's when the federal investigation got more serious. FBI agent Sarah Martinez had been quietly building the civil rights case, but Karen's public harassment of a disabled veteran pushed this into the category of a hate crime. Agent Martinez contacted Jake to explain that Karen's campaign had triggered federal hate crime laws specifically designed to protect disabled veterans from systematic harassment. Mr. Thornfield, Agent Martinez explained during their meeting, what started as HOA discrimination has become a federal hate crime. Mrs. Whitmore's targeting of your military service and disability status makes this more than simple housing discrimination. We're talking about potential federal prison time. Meanwhile, Karen's final meltdown was reaching an explosive level. Her husband, Dave, had filed for separation, citing Karen's obsessive and destructive behavior that was costing their family everything. Her real estate clients were cancelling contracts after seeing the news coverage. Her own mother was refusing to take Karen's calls because she was so embarrassed by the public display. Karen's reaction to this social isolation was to double down on the conspiracy theories. She started posting on social media about veteran privilege and disability scams funded by taxpayers. She claimed Jake was part of a planned attack on hard-working Americans by professional victims who wanted special treatment. The posts were unhinged rants that sounded like they were written by someone having a complete mental breakdown. Karen accused Jake of weaponizing his PTSD and claimed that service dogs were just emotional support pets with fake licenses. She even suggested that Jake had inflicted the chemical injuries on Rex himself to get sympathy. Every single post was screenshotted by Maria Santos and added to the growing federal case file. Karen was basically providing a real-time documentary of her hatred for disabled people, with exact times and digital proof that showed she had planned her harassment campaign. But Karen's greatest act of self-destruction came when she confronted Jake at the local Safeway, with news cameras coincidentally there for a community charity story. The encounter was pure Karen, screaming about special treatment and unfair advantages, while Jake calmly loaded groceries into his cart with Rex by his side. "You people think you deserve everything handed to you," Karen shrieked, loud enough for the entire store to hear. "Real Americans work for what we get instead of milking disabilities for government handouts." Then she made the mistake that would end her freedom. Karen reached for Rex's service vest, trying to prove it was just a costume. The moment her hands touched that federal service animal, assault charges became unavoidable. Rex, trained to protect Jake from aggressive people, positioned himself between Karen and his handler while remaining completely calm. The security footage went viral within hours. Karen Whitmore, HOA Vice President and self-appointed Community Standards Enforcer, attacking a Purple Heart recipient's service dog in a grocery store while ranting about veteran benefits. The situation looked so bad that even her remaining supporters publicly distanced themselves. Within 24 hours, Karen was facing federal assault charges. Her real estate license was suspended, and every major news outlet in Colorado was running the story. Her campaign to destroy Jake had instead destroyed everything she had built over 15 years. Jake watched the footage that evening with Rex curled up beside him on the couch and realized that Karen had finally given him everything he needed for a complete victory. The Pinewood Heights Community Center had never seen anything like it. What was supposed to be a regular annual HOA meeting had become the suburban version of a public spectacle, with 150 residents crammed into a space meant for 50. Local news cameras lined the back wall. Federal agents sat in folding chairs like they were attending a town hall. And the air was filled with the tense excitement that comes when an entire community is about to watch justice be served. Karen arrived with her lawyer, a public defender who looked desperate and kept checking his phone as if hoping for an emergency to get him out of this nightmare. She sat alone in the front row, her usual designer outfit replaced by a wrinkled pantsuit that showed her life was falling apart. The vanilla perfume that had once announced her presence was replaced by the sour smell of stress, sweat, and desperation. Jake walked in with Rex by his side, and the room erupted in spontaneous applause. 30 veterans from the surrounding area had come to show their support, many wearing their service organization hats and pins. Ashley Cameron was live streaming on Facebook. Gladys Rivera had her stack of rulebooks ready, and Maria Santos sat at the table like a prosecutor preparing for the most important trial of her career. HOA President Bill Thompson, who had been trying to stay neutral throughout this disaster, called the meeting to order with visibly shaking hands. "Before we address normal business," he announced, "we need to discuss the audit findings regarding the board's financial management." The room went silent as Thompson read from the professional audit report: $23,000 in fraudulent spending, $15,000 paid to unlicensed consultants who happened to be Karen's family members, and $8,000 in unauthorized personal expenses charged to community funds. The numbers hit the packed room like physical blows, each new detail causing gasps and angry whispers. Furthermore, Thompson continued, the audit found a pattern of discriminatory enforcement targeting residents with disabilities, medical conditions, and other protected classes. That's when FBI agent Sarah Martinez stood up and addressed the community directly. Her federal credentials shined under the bright lights as she explained how a simple HOA dispute had turned into a landmark federal civil rights case. Mrs. Whitmore is facing federal charges for housing discrimination, assault on a service animal, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and hate crimes against a disabled veteran, Agent Martinez announced. This investigation has revealed a systematic targeting of protected classes through the misuse of HOA authority. Karen's lawyer tried to get her to stay quiet, but Karen had been building up to this moment for months and wasn't about to let federal agents have the last word. She grabbed the microphone with the desperate energy of someone whose entire world was collapsing. "This is all fake news and outside troublemakers," she screamed into the microphone, her voice breaking with hysteria. "I was protecting this community from lazy people and scammers who want special treatment for made-up disabilities." The room watched in horrified fascination as Karen stood by every discriminatory statement that had gotten her into federal trouble. She claimed veterans with PTSD were milking the system, called service dogs, expensive pets with fake licenses, and accused disabled residents of using their conditions as a weapon to get government handouts. Every word was being recorded by multiple news cameras and live streams. Karen was basically providing real-time evidence for her own hate crime prosecution, while 150 neighbors watched in stunned silence. Then came Jake's moment. Maria Santos read his prepared statement while Jake stood beside her with Rex, his purple heart pin reflecting the harsh fluorescent light. "Karen Whitmore didn't just attack my service dog," the statement began. "She attacked every disabled person's right to a home, every veteran's right to dignity, and every American's right to live without fear of discrimination from small-minded dictators who think HOA rules matter more than federal law." The statement described Karen's planned campaign against disabled residents, her financial fraud schemes, and how she had gone from harassment to a chemical assault. But the real finishing blow came at the end. Mrs. Whitmore claimed she was protecting property values, Jake's statement concluded. But discrimination doesn't protect anything. It destroys communities, goes against American principles, and disrespects the very freedoms that veterans like me fought to defend. The community testimony that followed was devastating. 12 residents described Karen's harassment. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman with the oxygen concentrator, explained how Karen's fire safety concerns had made her afraid to use her life-saving medical equipment. The family with the autistic son described months of complaints about their child's disruptive behavior during therapy sessions in their own backyard. When the time came to vote to remove Karen from the HOA board, it wasn't even close. 127 residents voted for her removal, with only 3 abstentions and 0 votes in her support. The new board was elected unanimously with a commitment to anti-discrimination policies and financial transparency. But the real climax came when federal marshals, who had been waiting outside, entered the community center with arrest warrants. Karen was taken into custody on federal charges, while news cameras captured every moment of her walk through the parking lot, where she had once terrorized neighbors with HOA violation notices. As handcuffs clicked around Karen's wrists, she made one final desperate claim: this is all a conspiracy against successful white women. The community center erupted in mocking laughter. Even her own lawyer shook his head as federal agents led Karen away to face justice that was 3 years overdue. Jake stood with Rex in the parking lot afterward, surrounded by neighbors who had finally found their voices, watching Karen's story end the way all small-time dictatorships eventually end, with accountability, justice, and the community she had tried to destroy, celebrating their freedom from her rule. Months later, justice had been served with the kind of exactness that makes you feel good about America again. Karen Whitmore pleaded guilty to federal civil rights violations, assault on a service animal, and conspiracy charges. She received 18 months in federal prison, $75,000 in fines, and a lifetime ban from any HOA position nationwide. Her real estate license was permanently taken away in 3 states. Her marriage ended in divorce, and her conspiracy theories about veteran fraud made her a cautionary tale in federal hate crime training programs. Jake's federal civil rights settlement of $150,000, combined with the recovered HOA funds, created something beautiful: Rex's Fund, a scholarship program that provides service dog training for disabled veterans. In its first year, the fund sponsored training for 15 veterans across the country, with Rex himself becoming a certified therapy dog who helps other disabled veterans dealing with housing discrimination. The transformation of Pinewood Heights became a national example for how to create welcoming communities. Property values went up by 20% because of the good press about their anti-discrimination policies. 3 new disabled residents moved in, attracted by the neighborhood's reputation for being accepting. The sound of children asking, "Can I pet your dog?" during evening walks replaced the terrible memory of Rex's chemical burns healing. But the real victory was watching former rivals become allies. Bob Harris, Karen's retired cop supporter, now volunteers with veteran housing advocacy. Martha Stevens organized the neighborhood's first accessibility awareness event. Even Karen's victims found healing. Mrs. Patterson, with her oxygen concentrator, became the community's unofficial accessibility consultant, helping new residents with their requests for accommodations. Jake's YouTube channel, Service Dog Rights, gained 100,000 subscribers, turning his nightmare into a platform for positive change. His federal case created a legal precedent that has been used in 37 similar lawsuits nationwide, with Colorado passing a law that requires HOA disability rights training because of his victory. The impact continues to spread across America. Jake speaks at congressional hearings about HOA reform, his story showing how federal civil rights laws protect disabled residents from suburban discrimination. Rex goes with him to every speaking engagement, a living reminder that service animals aren't just pets. They're medical equipment with wagging tails. 1 year after the chemical attack, Pinewood Heights hosted its first Community Heroes Day, a block party celebrating residents of all abilities. The smell of grilled burgers mixed with the laughter of children learning about service dog etiquette from Jake. Rex wore a community hero ribbon, accepting gentle pets from kids whose parents had learned that being welcoming makes neighborhoods stronger, not weaker. The event raised $8,000 for Rex's fund and featured booths from disability advocacy organizations. Jake watched families from nearby communities come together, realizing that Karen's hatred had accidentally created something she never intended. A model of what American neighborhoods could become when they choose love over fear. As the sun set, behind the familiar houses where intimidation once ruled, Jake felt Rex's warm fur under his fingers and experienced something he hadn't felt since Afghanistan: complete peace. The feeling of community support, the sound of real laughter, the smell of hope replacing the sharp memory of chemical attacks. Here's what every viewer needs to know. HOA board members can be personally responsible for discrimination violations. Federal disability laws apply to all housing, including HOA communities, and documented patterns of harassment can lead to settlements of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Karen learned these lessons the hard way. You don't have to. Coming up next week on HOA Stories, Jake announced during his live stream from the celebration. We're exposing an HOA president who stole $300,000 for a backyard water park while increasing fees for seniors on fixed incomes. Wait until you see how one grandmother's spreadsheet brought down his entire criminal operation. Leave your most ridiculous HOA nightmare in the comments below. Your story could be featured in future episodes where we hold these suburban dictators accountable. And make sure you're subscribed to HOA Stories with notifications turned on, because we're just getting started exposing the petty tyrants hiding behind community association rules across America. The live stream ended with Rex getting his ears scratched by children whose parents had learned that a community's true strength comes from protecting its most vulnerable members, not targeting them. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's building something so beautiful from the ashes that your enemy's hatred becomes the foundation for everyone else's hope. Thanks for watching HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, please like the video, leave a comment with your reaction, and subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.